The galactic assembly on the floating station Orion 9 was filled with tension that could almost be touched. Delegates from hundreds of worlds sat in curved rows, their strange forms glittering under the light of the twin suns outside the transparent dome. It was supposed to be a day of peace, the signing of a great alliance treaty that would unite species across the stars. Yet beneath the calm faces, everyone knew that peace was fragile. And sitting quietly at the center of it all was Captain Marcus Hale, the only human in the room, wearing his dark navy uniform and an unreadable expression. Humans were known for many things: curiosity, courage, unpredictability, but above all they were known for their patience that always came before something big. Most aliens didn't understand it, but the older races remembered what happened when humans lost that patience. As the debates dragged on, an envoy from the proud and arrogant Xynar Empire began to mock Earth's role in the alliance. His voice echoed through the chamber as he laughed, calling humans emotion-driven primitives who were only good for following orders. The crowd chuckled nervously, unsure if the joke was harmless or dangerous. Marcus did not react. He simply adjusted his wristband and stared at the holographic treaty floating in front of him. The Xynar envoy took his silence as weakness and continued, stepping closer until his shadow fell across the human's face. "Tell me, Captain," he sneered, "what can your kind possibly offer to the galaxy besides chaos?" For a moment, there was only silence. The humming lights above flickered faintly, as if the station itself was holding its breath. Marcus slowly stood up, his calm blue eyes meeting the envoy's glowing red ones. His voice was quiet but carried through the entire chamber. "Now," he said softly, "you've really pushed it." It was a simple sentence, but the reaction was immediate. Across the room, several alien delegates stiffened. A few began to pack their documents. Some even slipped away toward the exits, whispering to their aides in hushed panic. The Xynar envoy looked around in confusion, his arrogance slowly turning into unease. He didn't understand why every species suddenly seemed afraid, not of him, but of the human who hadn't even raised his voice. Marcus remained perfectly still, his expression unchanged, but his words seemed to echo through the metallic walls like a quiet thunderstorm. Somewhere in the back rows, an old veteran from the Zorathi species leaned close to his young assistant and whispered, "When a human says that, you don't stay in the same room." The assistant's eyes widened and he followed his mentor out of the hall without another word. The envoy tried to speak again, but the weight of silence pressed down on him. For reasons he couldn't explain, his chest tightened, and a small chill crawled up his spine. On the viewing platform above, the galactic observers began taking notes, recording the moment. They knew the legend. Humans never acted out of rage, but once their limit was crossed, something unpredictable always followed. Marcus finally took a step forward, his boots echoing softly on the marble floor. "We came here for peace," he said, his voice steady. "But peace does not mean weakness." The lights above flickered again, and for a second, everyone saw the faint reflection of Earth's fleet hovering in the background of the holographic display, waiting silently beyond communication range. No weapons were raised, no threats were made, yet the message was clear. The Xynar envoy swallowed hard, realizing that maybe, just maybe, he had gone too far. Marcus adjusted his uniform, gave a slight nod to the assembly, and calmly walked out of the chamber as the silence deepened around him. Outside, the twin suns were setting over the horizon of the nearby planet, painting the space station in shades of gold and red. Inside, every delegate sat frozen, their hearts beating faster than they wanted to admit. The phrase still echoed in their minds, simple yet heavy with meaning. "Now you've really pushed it." And for the first time in decades, the galaxy remembered why humans were both feared and respected. They didn't shout. They didn't threaten. They just warned you once. The moment Captain Marcus Hale left the Galactic Assembly Hall, a wave of unease rippled through the corridors of Orion 9. The grand station, usually buzzing with the calm hum of diplomacy, now felt different, quieter, colder, as if the air itself was waiting for something to happen. Delegates whispered behind closed doors, guards exchanged nervous glances, and news of the human S final word spread faster than light through the station AS network. Now you've really pushed it. It was only 5 words, but to the older species it was more than a phrase. It was a signal, a warning they had hoped to never hear again. The Xynar envoy, who had mocked Marcus, tried to regain his composure. He laughed nervously, assuring everyone it was nothing more than human dramatics. But the other ambassadors were not convinced. The elder Zorathi delegate, scales glinting in the dim light, turned to him and said quietly, "You fool, do you even know what that means?" The envoy scoffed, waving his hand dismissively, yet his eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt. Far above the assembly, in the hidden command decks of the station, sensors began to blink. Tiny red lights, signals from deep space, were activating one after another. On distant planets, ancient automated systems built during the Human Alliance war era began to stir. Massive relay satellites, silent for decades, powered up again, sending encrypted codes across light years. Somewhere on the edge of the Sol system, a dark station known as Sentinel Node came online, its massive antennas rotating toward the stars as a deep metallic voice echoed through its core. Protocol initiated, awaiting command. The humans had created this system long ago, not as a weapon, but as a shield, one that would respond only to specific diplomatic triggers. And Marcus Hale's phrase had just awakened it. Back on Orion 9, Marcus stood in front of a large viewport overlooking the stars. He looked calm, but his wrist communicator flickered with a silent message. "Sentinel active. Situation acknowledged." He didn't smile or react. He only took a deep breath and closed his hand over the device. Behind him, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed. It was Lyra, his aide, and the only other human stationed on Orion 9. Her eyes were wide with concern. "Captain, what did you do? They're terrified out there." Marcus turned slightly, his gaze steady but distant. "I did what was necessary," he replied. "They needed to remember who they're dealing with." Lyra hesitated, glancing nervously at the stars beyond the glass. "You know what happens when that protocol wakes up," she whispered. "It listens. It watches. It waits for your command." Marcus nodded. "I know, but it also understands restraint. It's human." Meanwhile, across the galaxy, leaders began sending urgent transmissions. Some called for calm, others prepared defenses, though none truly believed the humans would attack first. Still, the fear was enough. The Xynar Empire's council convened in secret, debating whether to issue an apology or double down. Pride wrestled with fear, and in their pride, they made a mistake. They sent ships closer to Orion 9 for observation. On the station, technicians noticed the movement instantly. The assembly's alarm systems remained silent, but the humans' private network lit up with warnings. Marcus received the report quietly, reading it in a single glance. Lyra waited for him to react, but instead he simply said, "They're testing how far they can go." Then, without turning, he spoke softly. "Prepare a message for all delegates. Tell them I'll address the assembly again in 1 hour." Lyra hesitated, then nodded and left. Alone once more, Marcus looked out at the endless stretch of stars. He knew the truth the others didn't that humanity's greatest power wasn't its ships or weapons. It was the unity that came when someone threatened peace. And as the stars shimmered faintly against the black, he could almost feel Earth's pulse awakening across the void. Something had begun, and this time, there would be no turning back. Across the vast silence of space, the ripple of human activation spread like a quiet storm. On distant colonies, automated defense systems that had been dormant for decades blinked to life. Old satellites realigned. Ancient AI programs whispered to one another in coded language, and deep beneath the surface of Mars, a forgotten command hub opened its glowing eyes. It was Protocol Sentinel, a defense system so advanced that most modern species believed it was only a legend. Its purpose was not to destroy, but to respond, to protect humanity's honor when diplomacy failed. On Orion 9, Captain Marcus Hale stood in the command observatory, hands clasped behind his back, staring at the blue swirl of a nearby planet. His wrist device buzzed softly, displaying a single message: Sentinel online, awaiting authorization. He didn't move for a while, letting the hum of the station fill the silence. The galaxy had always underestimated humans, assuming their patience meant weakness, but Marcus knew better. Patience was just a quiet kind of power, one that waited until words no longer worked. A soft chime interrupted his thoughts as Lyra entered the observatory, her expression tense. "Sir, every major news network is broadcasting your words," she said. "Half the council is in panic mode, and the other half wants to evacuate the station." Marcus turned to her with a calm expression. "Let them panic if they must. Fear teaches faster than reason." She frowned, stepping closer. "And the Xynar ships? They've moved into orbit around Orion 9. They're calling it a protective maneuver." Marcus sighed quietly. "Protective," he repeated. "That's a polite word for intimidation." He looked out the viewport again, eyes reflecting the distant glint of the Xynar cruisers. "Do we have visual contact?" Lyra nodded. "Yes, but they've gone dark. No transmissions, no hails." Marcus tapped his communicator. "They're testing us," he murmured. "They want to see if humans still mean what they say." He paused, then whispered a single command into his wrist device. "Sentinel, initiate passive demonstration." Light years away, in the cold silence of deep space, Sentinel node obeyed. Without firing a single shot, it caused every Xynar ship's sensors to flicker. Their navigation systems briefly froze, their shields shimmered like heat waves, and then, just as suddenly, everything returned to normal. No damage, no attack, only a whisper in their systems that reminded them something vast was watching. Back in the Xynar flagship, alarms flared and technicians scrambled to make sense of the readings. The commander barked orders, demanding explanations, but none came. It was as if the void itself had breathed on their ship. On Orion 9, Marcus received confirmation of the demonstration. Lyra stared at him, startled. "You didn't even lift a weapon," she said quietly. Marcus looked at her with a faint smile. "We never have to. We just remind them what happens when they forget who we are." He turned toward the corridor leading to the assembly chamber. "It's time," he said. "They wanted to test humanity's patience. Now they'll see its purpose." As he walked through the metallic halls, murmurs followed him. Aliens of every shape and color moved aside, some bowing slightly, others watching in awe or fear. Even without saying a word, his presence carried weight. In the chamber, the delegates were already waiting, their voices low and uneasy. The Xynar envoy looked shaken but tried to stand tall. Marcus stepped to the center platform, the holographic light illuminating his calm face. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "I came here to preserve peace, not to threaten it. But peace cannot exist without respect." He looked around the room, his gaze steady. "When I said those words earlier, I didn't speak as a soldier. I spoke as a human. And humans only warn once." The chamber fell silent. Somewhere deep in the shadows of the station, Sentinel's systems pulsed faintly in sync with his words. Marcus raised his hand slightly, his tone soft but firm. "Let this be clear to all of you. Humanity does not seek war. But if you push us beyond patience, you will find out that we don't need war to win." The silence stretched long after he finished, and as he turned to leave, every being in the room understood that something invisible had shifted in the galaxy. A quiet force had awakened, and it wore the face of a calm human. The chamber remained silent long after Captain Marcus Hale's footsteps faded down the corridor. No one dared to speak. Even the air felt charged, humming faintly with the energy of something larger than the moment itself. The delegates exchanged uneasy glances, trying to process what had just happened. Some called it diplomacy, others called it a warning, but every species present knew one truth now: the humans were awake. News of the event spread across Orion 9 like wildfire, traveling through comm channels, news screens, and whispered conversations. Entire delegations began preparing for early departure, while others sent urgent messages to their homeworlds. Meanwhile, in the orbit above the station, the Xynar fleet still lingered, 3 heavy cruisers holding position, their dark hulls gleaming under the twin suns. Inside their flagship, Admiral Korath paced furiously. "He's bluffing," he snapped at his officers. "The humans are just using fear." But even as he said it, his eyes betrayed doubt. Their instruments were still malfunctioning at random intervals. Lights flickered without cause, navigation screens glitched, and the air seemed colder than usual. Whatever had brushed their systems earlier had left an invisible mark. On the surface of Orion 9, Marcus returned to his private quarters. Lyra followed him, her voice tense. "Sir, the Xynar ships haven't retreated. They're waiting for something. Maybe an excuse." Marcus sat at his desk, his expression unreadable. "Then they'll wait a long time," he said. "We've already made our point." Lyra looked at him, puzzled. "You're not going to respond?" Marcus leaned back slightly, glancing at the silent communicator on his wrist. "Sometimes silence speaks louder than force," he said quietly. "But if they decide to cross the line again, Sentinel will know before we do." Unknown to both of them, Sentinel Node had already expanded its reach. From the depths of space, its silent network now watched over every ship within the system. Without interference, without detection, it monitored energy patterns, communications, and every flicker of intent, not to strike, but to understand. Humanity had built it not as a weapon, but as a guardian, a reflection of their principle that strength comes from restraint. Back in the assembly, the delegates began to reorganize under the heavy shadow of what had just occurred. The Zarathi elder stood and addressed the room. "Let us not pretend ignorance," he said. "When a human says those words, history changes." His statement was followed by murmurs of agreement. Even the most skeptical races now understood that this was not superstition. It was memory. Throughout the galaxy's archives were stories of human patience being tested and the unimaginable unity that followed when it finally broke. For centuries, the phrase, "now you've really pushed it," had been passed down in whispers, a warning that no one truly wanted to believe. Until now. Marcus returned later that day, summoned once again to the central hall. The delegates were waiting, their faces no longer defiant but cautious, respectful even. The Xynar envoy was present too, his arrogance gone, replaced by something closer to humility. Marcus stood at the center once more, calm and collected. "You all gathered here to form peace," he began, his voice even. "But peace cannot survive if pride replaces respect. Humanity does not want dominance. We want understanding. But if our patience must be mistaken for weakness again, then we will remind the stars what strength really means." He looked around the vast chamber, his words carrying the quiet authority of someone who didn't need to raise his voice to be heard. The Xynar envoy stepped forward slowly, lowering his head in acknowledgement. "Captain Hale," he said, his tone hesitant. "Perhaps we went too far." Marcus studied him for a long moment, then gave a single nod. "Perhaps," he replied, "but knowing when to step back is what keeps us from repeating the past." That evening, the Zynar ships withdrew from orbit without a single order or message. The Assembly approved a revised treaty, one that not only restored trust, but carried a silent promise: never again to test humanity's patience. As Marcus stood on the balcony overlooking the glowing rings of Orion 9, Lyra joined him, her voice soft. "They finally listened," she said. Marcus watched the stars shimmer in the distance and replied, "They didn't just listen. They remembered." And in that quiet moment, as Sentinel's distant pulse faded gently into the void, the galaxy once again understood that the most powerful weapon a human carried was not technology or war, but calm determination. When dawn broke over the twin suns of Orion 9, the great station glowed in shades of amber and gold, drifting peacefully above the quiet planet below. The tension that had once filled its halls had softened into something calmer, an uneasy peace that everyone hoped would last. Captain Marcus Hale stood on the upper balcony of the Assembly Tower, watching the ships come and go across the endless stretch of stars. For the first time in many years, the galaxy had paused to think before it spoke. Behind him, Lyra stepped forward, her footsteps light against the polished floor. "It's finally done," she said softly. "The revised treaty has been signed by every delegation. Even the Zynar Empire agreed." Marcus turned slightly, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Good," he replied. "Then maybe this time, words will last longer than fear." Lyra leaned against the railing beside him, looking out at the horizon. "I still can't believe it," she admitted. "All it took was one sentence to change everything." Marcus didn't answer immediately. He watched a group of small transport ships depart the docking bay, carrying alien envoys back to their homeworlds. "Words matter," he said finally, "but not because of power, because of truth. Everyone knows when a human says, 'Now you've really pushed it,' it's not anger speaking, it's patience ending." Across the galaxy, that very sentence had already become something of a legend. News channels repeated it in every language, storytellers retold it to crowds, and even the most skeptical species began to discuss the strange, quiet strength of humans. Children in alien academies asked their teachers what it meant. The teachers didn't always have the answer, but they all agreed on one thing. It was not a threat. It was a reminder. A reminder that the humans, though peaceful by nature, were never to be taken lightly. On the Zynar homeworld, the Emperor himself watched a replay of Marcus's speech in silence. The hall around him was filled with his advisors, all waiting for his reaction. When the recording ended, the Emperor simply said, "From this day forward, we will treat humanity as an equal, not a rival." The statement spread through the Empire within hours, marking the first true gesture of humility in Zynar history. Meanwhile, on Earth, the activation of Sentinel Node had reached the High Council. Deep within the Atlantic Command Center, Admiral Chen received the final transmission. "Protocol completed. Standing by for deactivation." She smiled faintly and gave the order to shut it down. Across deep space, massive relay satellites powered down, glowing red lights fading to black once more. Humanity had shown its strength without firing a single shot. The message had been delivered, not through violence, but through restraint. And for the galaxy, that was more terrifying and more inspiring than any weapon. Back on Orion 9, the Assembly held one final gathering before the delegates' departure. The hall was quieter now, not out of fear but respect. The Zorathi elder stood to speak first, his scaled hands clasped in front of him. "This day will be remembered," he said, his deep voice echoing through the chamber, "because a single human reminded us that peace is not born from power. It is protected by it." The delegates nodded, murmuring in agreement. Then, to everyone's surprise, the Zynar envoy rose as well. His tone was calm, his posture humble. "Captain Hale," he said, "on behalf of the Zynar Empire, I extend our apology. And our gratitude. You showed us what real strength looks like." Marcus inclined his head respectfully. It wasn't strength, he replied. It was resolve. Strength can be broken. Resolve can't. The envoy bowed slightly, and for the first time, the assembly erupted in genuine applause. After the meeting, Marcus walked through the quiet corridors of the station one last time. Every alien he passed gave a small nod or smile, tiny gestures of acknowledgement that spoke louder than any treaty. He made his way to the docking bay where his transport ship waited. Lyra followed close behind, carrying a small case of data tablets. "You know," she said, "this story is going to be told for generations." Marcus chuckled softly. "Stories change," he said, "but the truth behind them doesn't. Maybe that's enough." As the ship's engines came to life, the twin suns reflected off its silver hull. Lyra glanced out the window as they lifted off, watching the massive station grow smaller in the distance. "Do you think they'll ever forget?" she asked. Marcus shook his head. "No," he said softly, "because peace built on fear fades. But peace, built on respect, endures." The stars stretched out before them, endless and quiet. Marcus leaned back in his seat, finally allowing himself a moment of rest. For the first time in a long while, the galaxy was calm. The phrase that had once sent every species running now served as a symbol, not of warning, but of wisdom. It reminded them all that humans, though fragile and flawed, carried within them something timeless, the courage to speak softly and the strength to mean every word. Years later, historians would write about that day in the assembly, calling it the turning point of the stars. Statues of Marcus Hale would stand in museums across worlds, not holding a weapon, but with his hands folded calmly at his sides, and carved beneath those statues were the words that changed everything. "Now you've really pushed it." For generations to come, whenever any race began to test the limits of peace, those 5 simple words would echo in their minds, reminding them of the day the galaxy learned the true power of human resolve.